Hi, I'm Tim Schafer from Double Fine Productions. We're interviewing players from the game Brutal Legend.
This is Tim Schafer, an auteurist game designer and something of an oddity in the world of game development. When it comes to the subject of industry achievements, you'd be hard-pressed to find a creator capable of walking the fine line between his disposition as a true artist and a significant level of mainstream success and recognition. Whatever your opinion on Tim Schafer may be, he is inarguably a daring designer willing to take risks that push against the tides and trends of AAA development, which is a quality that many of us claim to admire and advocate within the industry. And that makes the topic of today's video all the more perplexing. This is Brutal Legend. Now, for the uninitiated, Brutal Legend is a rather unique blend of immersive and story-driven action-adventure built around and anchored by a thrilling, chaotic, real-time strategy game. Now, if that weren't unique enough, it was also released on console during the 360 era dominated by brown modern military shooters. Modern Warfare 2, for instance, came out the same year, 2009. The success of the Xbox 360 seemed to cement gaming as the mainstream cultural phenomenon that we see today. But you could say that Brutal Legend's marketing was perhaps a bit intentionally misleading.
And I still thought of it as like, okay, they're not kind of like these two games, but it was definitely both publishers were like, let's not say RTS, except in Germany. It's dead. No one cares about RTS. I was like, what if someone asks if it's an RTS game? He's like, change the subject. Just don't.
So the success of the game was limited to say the least, especially around release time. And if you ask a random person if they remember Brutal Legend, I'd be willing to put money down that most wouldn't remember this game at all, let alone have played it. And that's a shame, because much like essentially all of Tim Schafer's work, beginning all the way back to his history at LucasArts, it's an amazing game, filled to the brim with interesting mechanics, clever and unique writing, and visuals that stand on their own even to this day. So to catch you up, Tim Schafer began his career as a programmer, but quickly added writing to his resume on a game some of us may have played, The Secret of Monkey Island. And if even that still leaves you scratching your head, just go fucking play the game because it's a classic. The point here is that Schafer is known for his incredible ability as a writer, especially where clever and humorous dialogue is concerned, and it shines brightly within Brutal Legend. The story itself is a fairly monolithic tale, standard for its genre, but its narrative framing is what makes it truly unique even within the Tim Schafer pantheon of games. At its core, it's a mythologizing of every heavy metal trope in existence. Here's just a short list of what we're talking about. Within the game, heavy metal was created by mythological creatures called Titans. Heavy metal music is magic, both in the literary, poetic sense and in the literal sense. The entire RTS game is structured around putting on a metal concert.
I think we got enough stuff here to put on possibly the best rock show ever. A show.
And bass strings are woven by giant metal spiders.
Whoa. Okay, I would ask nicely for some of your giant bass strings, but you don't strike me as the negotiating type, so out of personal respect, I'll just get right to the ass kicking.
Literally, the entire game world is structured around a high fantasy interpretive imagining of the origin and art of heavy metal. More specifically, Eddie Riggs, the protagonist, voiced by Jack Black of Tenacious D fame, lives out his life prior to the events of the game as a roadie. And though he takes the stage as a central character and the protagonist, it's continuously reinforced throughout the entire narrative arc that he lives his life intentionally out of the spotlight, preferring instead to be the organizer and the executor of operations as opposed to the star of the show.
A good roadie knows his whole job is to make someone else look good. Keep someone else safe. Help someone else do what they were put here to do. A good roadie stays out of the spotlight.
The game begins this way, and every story beat pulses around this core principle, which is in itself a unique take on the concept. I mean, it would be much easier to make the star of the game also the star of the show. However, I've spoken in the past about how game mechanics should work within the narrative drive of the game to facilitate immersion, and this is the core of the genius behind Brutal Legend. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for a rock star to manage operations, they're too busy being a rock star after all. Instead, what this does is create a sense of intrinsic value to the concept of a roadie that the player might otherwise never acknowledge. This wouldn't be important in a more traditional RTS game where the player is relegated to micromanaging units from a top-down perspective. In Brutal Legend, however, the narrative is framed around this concept, but more on the RTS structure later. The action-adventure section of the game is structured around a traditional questing structure, and those quests are structured in a way that you'll be intimately familiar with by this point. Eddie will ride across an open world, completing quests and finding collectibles, ranging from unlocking new pieces of the soundtrack to hunting missions that unlock new units to be used in the stage battles. But whereas in most open world games, quests are reduced primarily to solo fetch or gather quests, the side missions are generally quick and oftentimes used to reinforce Eddie's helpful nature as a character. The one exception being racing quests, which were by far my favorite of all the side missions, and a really good way to spot collectibles that you may have missed. Plus, the guy you're racing here, Fleetus, is a complete dick in the most endearing way, and he can do no wrong in my eyes.
You break down again?
She ain't broke. She's just waiting for the next victim.
The side characters are all well written, and many of them are actually just real people put into a fantasy setting. My two favorite standouts in this regard are the Killmaster, who is literally just Lemmy being Lemmy from Motorhead.
Nah, what the hell?
Noble Killmaster, this woman...
Didn't you see the signs? We don't like visitors up here.
And the Baron, who is voiced by and themed around Rob Halford of Judas Priest fame.
Let us not keep death waiting.
I told you they'd be back!
Rob Halford also voices this guy, General Lionwhite.
Well, some sort of bath is definitely in order.
Everything about Lionwhite is hilarious because his army is just a glam reskin of yours. Lionwhite, however, is named after the band White Lion and is literally a sellout. Which is a small detail, but sort of reinforces my point about the referential depth and humor of Tim Schafer's writing. Now, I'm definitely going to get several copyright claims on this video, but fuck it. So if you like heavy metal of various flavors, this soundtrack is obscenely good. There are 20 original tracks and then 107 licensed metal tracks, ranging from classic to modern, covering not just big hitters like Motorhead, but lesser known, more extreme genre gems like Skeleton Witch, It's strange too, because there are plenty of songs on the soundtrack that I would never listen to in an isolated environment, and yet the map itself seems to have been carefully crafted so that no song ever really needs a skip. Some fit better than others, of course, but none are ever really out of place when they're playing. If I had any preference while I was playing this game, it was for Kickstart My Heart, which isn't remotely my favorite song on the soundtrack. It just feels incredible to be racing across the map in the deuce, mowing down enemies and hitting your turbo boost to this song. It's legitimately some of the best audio-visual aesthetics I've ever seen in a game. Plus, there are a few key story moments that introduce a lot of these songs, and they are beautiful. But you'll have to play it to see those. But all of this is just a piece of a piece in the greater puzzle that is the aesthetic of Brutal Legend, and even trying to articulate my thoughts are proving somewhat overwhelming, but I'm going to try my best. First, the art style is so cleverly cartoonish that it removes the need for the suspension of disbelief. Compared to something like Metalocalypse, which did some similar things thematically, centering its world around the whims of a group of death metal musicians, and yet where Metalocalypse rarely if ever has moments that are meant to evoke emotions other than laughter, within Brutal Legend there are a few sad story beats that somehow still work. And to be honest, I'm not really sure why they work so well considering the abject and intentional absurdity of the game, but they do. Second, everything is so interesting to look at. From your baseline headbanger units who have varied headbands and t-shirts to just the environments themselves. I mean, juxtapose this with the individual units from other RTS games. Let's take a classic RTS for example, Red Alert 2. These units don't look unique amongst their own unit type. There's really no need to, again, because it's a top-down perspective with considerable distance between the player and the units he is controlling. But in an action-adventure title from the third person, where there's a crafted world and a more tactile personality and feel, it enhances the immersive factor. It's all of these tiny little details, and creating an exhaustive list would be impossible mine, firmly anchor the player into the world. And keep that point in the back of your mind as well, because it's going to come up again here pretty soon. Now, comparatively speaking, even though it's an older game, and therefore the open world philosophy is a bit older, the world itself ranks among one of the more interesting open worlds to explore, even if the quests aren't as interesting as later evolutions of the concept would require, and it all boils down to landmarking and the theming surrounding that landmarking. The first section of the map is standard, classic metal theming. Think the era spanning from Motorhead to roughly the ascent of Motley Crue. You've got a monument with a classic heavy metal cross, a guitar monument sticking up out of the ground, flaming volcanoes, swords sticking up out of the ground from a distance, things of that nature. But later on, you'll travel through a black/death/gothic metal themed area full of graveyards and broken train tracks, strangely illuminated ghastly lanterns, and a bat cave with a talking bat voiced by Ozzy Osbourne.
You got a problem, Bat?
Yeah, I got a problem. I got a problem with you attacking my family. Now get fucking lost or I'll bite your fucking head off.
I put about 20 hours into the game on this playthrough, and I never got tired of living within this world, especially because the aforementioned side quests are given to you in bite-sized chunks, and the currency reward they give you is worth it to buy upgrades for yourself and for your car. Oh, and to see Ozzy Osbourne is basically the voiced representative of metal itself.
Have you pleased the metal gods?
The best part is that the open world houses monuments containing new solos, which are effectively an easy rhythm game used to cast spells. Some of them are necessary for progression, such as the Relic Razor, which raises things like the cave needed to access the upgrades. And all the way on the other end of the spectrum, a spell that literally creates a zeppelin to crash at the player's location, dealing massive damage, and it just looks fucking cool. Now at this point, I'm hoping you're asking, man, this sounds great, why didn't more people play this game? So if you've seen the discourse around this game, you've probably seen detractors bring up one central point of contention, and that's the RTS aspect of the game, which doesn't comprise the majority of your time within the game, but is actually the central focus and the thing that the character performs all the story beats to reach. Now some people just don't like real-time strategy games, and that's fine. I'm not here to preach to those who can't be converted, but there's a splinter of the detractors who argue that the RTS aspect doesn't blend well with the third-person action aspect, and I think the core issue comes down to this. Despite its era, this game doesn't hold the player's hand quite enough to tutorialize what the player needs to do, I think. And because of this, I believe that most players played it incorrectly, or at least I know that I did it first. It's the difference in the nature of action titles versus strategy titles. Strategy titles are traditionally separated from the action. You're not meant to get attached to units, only guide them. In action games, however, the inclination to always be at the center of the action is literally the title of the genre, so the impulse to constantly be in the fray of the fight is ever present. The games are built around that concept, but Tim Schafer told us how we were supposed to play this game in the theming and the narrative of the game in the first place.
A good roadie knows his whole job is to make someone else look good. Keep someone else safe. Help someone else do what they were put here to do. A good roadie stays out of the spotlight.
You're not a rock star, you're a roadie. You are the most useful unit on the battlefield, but not everything requires your immediate attention, nor should you always be in the spotlight. In fact, the entire premise of every moment of the game revolves around Eddie traveling to get set up, to recruit, to fix problems. I mean, to quote the game.
But then before you even realize he was there, or what he did, he's gone.
It's not that the RTS aspect doesn't blend well. It's that we must reconceptualize our idea about what is dictated by a genre characteristic. And it is in this that Brutal Legend is incredibly subversive. Because of this dynamic nature, it actually turns the RTS stage battles into action RTS stage battles, where the player should never have his immediate attention focused on only one goal. In fact, it's highly inefficient to do so, because your units can be attacking a tower while you're building your own elsewhere on the map. That's the entire purpose of the flying mechanic, so that you can address problems as they spring up, and then get away as quickly as possible to go do other things. Think about the spells you find. Some of them buff your units, some of them summon new units, some of them anchor the enemy avatar so that they can't move around and fly around, which is effectively your mirror unit, by the way. In none of the fights do you constantly see the enemy avatar in the middle of every combat scenario, because it's busy being a supportive role. If you die, it isn't mission failure, but it is a considerable loss of efficiency, which is borderline defeat in any RTS, much less Brutal Legend. It sort of speaks to the era that birthed it. It was roughly around this 360 era and the opening of the floodgates to the hobby that the over-tutorialization of mechanics and the strict adherence to genre norms really took root. But those days are over now, and Elden Ring is topping the charts and dominating the news cycle, with players desperate to no longer have their hands held, and Brutal Legend stands out to me as a game where the design and the story itself is sufficient tutorialization. It's literally built into the opening missions. Unfortunately, however, the multiplayer seems to be completely dead, which is not really a surprise after so many years, but it's equally as unfortunate, as playing against the AI on brutal difficulty is a frenetic experience with a respectable amount of depth, while not being so deep as to be off-putting, such as in more traditional RTS, where you log online and you queue up in one game and then you get smashed immediately. I'm looking at you, StarCraft. In spite of that, however, Brutal Legend holds up to this day. Shines even, as nothing before or after can even come close to replicating the totality of its charm. It speaks to the power of experimentation, auteurist game design, and how tricks that have been used for decades can be repurposed and feel new, even 13 years after the fact.